These words from Matthew are so meaningful to me that I actually had a bird tattooed on my arm to remind me that God cares for the lilies and the birds, for the sparrows, and God cares for each and every one of us. And so I invite you to find the space, quiet in your own heart this morning. Let these words wash over you again. And I pray that my words would be faithful. Have you ever noticed that when you are worried, one of the most unhelpful things people can say is, "Don't worry." Are you worried about your job? Oh, don't worry about that. Are you worried about your health? Oh, don't worry. I had the same thing. It turned out fine. Are you worried about the state of the world? Oh, it's okay. Things change. Don't worry. I mean, trust me, if I could choose not to worry about these things, I certainly would. After all, we know that worrying doesn't do us any good. As Jesus says, it won't even add an hour to our lives. But it's not as simple as just choosing not to be anxious, is it? Anxiety is a normal biological function, actually, in human beings. The discomfort that worry creates is meant to capture our attention, to stimulate a response. Our brains are intentionally wired to make us aware of potential threats and to trigger a fight or flight reaction that can save our lives when we are actually in danger. And for millennia, when human beings lived in small communities in little villages with limited access to information, our brains could manage the stress of our reality. But today we have the internet and social media and 24-hour news, and we look at everything that's going on around us, from climate change and wars to the economy and threats to our democratic institutions. And if you are not worried, then you are probably not paying attention. We are literally carrying the weight of the world, and our systems can't handle it. Which is why it might seem odd or perhaps out of touch for these words of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount telling us not to worry about our lives, talking about birds and lilies as if that's going to give us any comfort. Do birds worry about inflation and gas prices? Can lilies get sick from contaminated lettuce? Is Jesus just so blissfully unaware of what's happening in the real world that he can't be bothered to worry? I mean, the only part of Jesus' sermon that we know for certain rings true for us is that last line from the reading, "Stop worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Someone once said that these words of Jesus are ones that could have only been spoken by a single guy living a carefree life on a beach in sunny Galilee. Because anyone else, any other person living in the day-to-day, people who are trying to work and earn enough to pay their bills, to save for college or their retirement, of course we're going to worry about these things. But Jesus was not a carefree surf bum living off a trust fund. Jesus was a poor Jew living under Roman occupation, as were his disciples and all those folks who had gathered on that hillside that day to come and hear Jesus preach. These were not nice, rich people with a stock portfolio. These were people who lived with constant economic uncertainty. They were fishers and farmers, artisans, tradespeople. Their livelihoods, their security and sense of stability was powerfully influenced by the economic system of their day. In Jesus' time, as in ours, life was hard for most people, and they worried. They worried about whether or not there would be enough food to feed their families, whether there would be enough water to drink in the heat of the day, whether they could plant and their plants would grow, whether there would be livestock in the dry season. They worried if there would be clothes for their children on the cold nights. Living under this level of economic uncertainty forced people to view the world through a lens of scarcity. There was never enough, and whatever they had could be gone tomorrow. So it led them to hoard, to steal, to borrow, to beg. It caused them to take on debt. Everything they had worked incredibly hard for. And so this experience of the world naturally extended into their spiritual lives as well. But the one thing they could be sure of was taxes. Because Caesar took 90% of people's wages as a tribute to the empire. And in return, what the empire offered was security. The Pax Romana promised to keep them safe and secure so long as they stayed loyal and kept giving to the emperor. The economic and political system that they lived under was designed to keep them in debt and dependent on the benevolence of Rome. It was the emperor who provided for them, and it was Rome that expected them to be grateful. Coming from the Latin word gratus, meaning pleasing or thankful, gratitude had a specific context in ancient Rome, where there was a social structure for gratitude. Benefactors were those who had wealth and access to resources, and they would give to those who were poorer so that they would always be in their debt. Charity in ancient Rome always flowed downward, so that gratitude naturally flowed upward. And that those who were on the bottom of the pyramid were receivers, and those at the top were the givers. And like the scarcity mentality of their economic system, this system of gratitude as something that came from being in debt also started to shape people's understanding of God for those people living in ancient Israel. It had worked its way into the temple system, where poor people had to exchange money at exorbitant rates in order to purchase animals and make offerings to pay their gratitude to God. And so this system of sacrificial offerings started to make people think of faith as a quid pro quo, kind of like the empire. If I show God / the emperor / the temple system how grateful I am by paying my taxes and making sacrificial offerings on the high holidays, then God / the empire / the temple system will provide for me. But Jesus offers a radically different vision of God's economy. An economy that is based on justice and faithfulness and abundance. First, Jesus reminds them and us that God is not like the emperor. That God's kingdom is radically different from the kingdoms of this world. That God gives good gifts to all people and offers them abundantly. In God's realm, there is more than enough. And if you don't believe me, just look around. Look at the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. See how God provides for them. And then Jesus offers an invitation. Release your anxiety and put your trust in this God of abundance. Jesus invites us to replace our worries with something else, a new way of viewing the world. Substitute your scarcity for abundance. Replace your worry with gratitude for those gifts that are all around you. And this gratitude to God, it's not a quid pro quo. God provides for us because that's what God does. God gives to us just as God gives to the birds and the flowers, not so that we will feel indebted, but so that we will know that our God and this world that God made is full of gifts. In response, God only asks that we do not worry, that we do not live in fear or hoard from one another, but share our gifts freely given with each other so that everyone may participate in God's abundance. That is how we show our gratitude. You know, in the last 2 decades, gratitude has become a hot topic among psychologists who've begun to study its impact on our brains. And study after study shows that when we intentionally practice gratitude, say by writing down the things we are thankful for in a journal at the end of the day, or by expressing our thanks to others, or by looking in the mirror in the morning and saying thank you for our very lives, it triggers our brains to release a chemical called serotonin and dopamine. These are chemicals that reduce anxiety and stress in our bodies. So by focusing on gratitude as a daily practice, it can help us release our toxic emotions. It can reduce physical pain, improve our sleep, and over time we can literally rewire our brains to be less anxious, to not worry so much. It's almost as if we were designed to feel gratitude and let it be a moving force in our lives. And it's one thing to feel grateful, but Jesus actually calls us to more than that. Jesus invites us into a reality, a kingdom, a way of life that is centered on gratitude. Out of an awareness of the gifts of God that surround us, we are invited to create a community that offers God's abundance to everyone. In her book entitled Grateful, The Transformative Power of Giving Thanks, the religious sociologist Diana Butler Bass calls us to gratitude as a way of life that can change not just our hearts and minds, but the very structure of our society. When we start to recognize that we are surrounded by gifts, that being alive is in fact a blessing, we feel the need to respond. It is out of this gratitude that we are moved to create community in which everyone can experience God's abundance. She writes, gratitude is not a psychological or a political panacea, like a secular prosperity gospel, one that denies pain or overlooks injustice because being grateful does not fix anything. Pain and suffering and injustice, these things are real. They do not go away just because we are thankful. Gratitude, however, invalidates the false narratives that these things are the sum total of human existence, that despair has the last word. Gratitude gives us a new story. It opens our eyes to see that every life is unique and dignified and graced. The lives of the poor, the cast off, the sick, the jailed, the exiled, the abused, the forgotten, as well as all of us in more comfortable physical circumstances. Your life, my life. We all share in the ultimate gift of life itself right now. And so, beloved, this is our invitation this morning, to take the time to turn our attention to the abundance that surrounds us here and now. This community and the love that is shared among us, this worship, and the music and the prayers and the presence of God that comfort us and embolden us no matter what physical space we are in. Our place at the table, a table of grace with the gift of God that are freely given. We are invited into worship to be filled with thankfulness until the worries and anxieties of our lives start to release their grip, and we see that it is all gift. And then to extend those gifts beyond this place out into the world so that all might be able to share in God's abundance. May it be so.